Clara stood at the edge of her small apartment, her backpack slung over one shoulder, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness. She had been planning this hike for weeks, quiet mornings, fresh air, no one demanding her attention. The city had worn her down. Her marriage, once full of warmth, now felt cold and distant. The men in her life, her husband and his close friends, seemed to only see her as someone to be managed, ignored, or dismissed. Clara didn't want to feel invisible anymore. She needed to find herself again, even if it meant walking alone into the unknown. The early morning air was crisp as she stepped onto the trailhead leading to the Appalachian woods. Trees towered above, casting long shadows that shifted with the rising sun. Clara's boots crunched softly on the gravel path, each step carrying her farther from the noise and tension she'd left behind. The sounds of the city car horns, shouting voices. The buzz of electronics faded quickly, replaced by birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves. It was the kind of silence that felt rare and precious, like a breath she had been holding for too long. With every mile she walked, Clara felt the weight on her chest lighten just a little. The pain of neglect and misunderstanding still lingered, but here, surrounded by nature, it seemed manageable. She thought about her husband, about the cold dinners and the quiet evenings filled with separate screens and separate worlds. It wasn't just about loneliness, it was about feeling unseen. She wondered when their marriage had started to unravel. When conversations became sharp or silent, and when the love they once shared became just a memory. Her mind drifted to the men she had hoped to escape her husband's friends, who had always made her feel uncomfortable. Even if nothing had ever been said aloud, she had hoped the hike would be a place far from their judgments and their whispers. She wanted to clear her head to find the strength she needed to face what was next. She told herself this was just a walk, just a moment of peace. The trail curved gently upward, and Clara's legs burned with the effort, but she welcomed the physical challenge. It distracted her from the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm her. The forest felt like a different world, timeless, unchanging, honest. She breathed in the pine scent, letting it fill her lungs, washing away the heaviness of weeks and months. As she moved deeper into the woods, she noticed the sunlight filtering through the canopy, casting golden spots on the ground. The peace was almost too perfect, too fragile. Clara thought she was alone, truly alone for the first time in years. But she didn't realize she was being watched. From a ridge not far away, two men stood quietly, their eyes fixed on the woman below. They didn't speak at first, just observed. They were part of the same world Clara had left behind, the same circle of friends who had grown too close to her husband. The same men whose presence had always unsettled her. They hadn't expected to see her here, out in the wilderness, where they thought she would never come. But now that she was, they were unsure what to do. Clara's pace slowed, a strange feeling creeping over her like a shadow on a sunny day. She glanced up toward the ridge but saw nothing. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, the escape she wanted wasn't as complete as she hoped. Were they really here? Had they followed her? Why? She tried to shake off the thought and pressed on. Her legs ached, her breath came in steady bursts. But she kept moving, telling herself that this hike was hers alone. The trees closed in around her, the sounds of the forest wrapping her in a quiet cocoon. But the idea that someone might be watching made her feel exposed in a way the city never had. Clara's mind wandered to the reasons she had left, how the small betrayals and quiet silences had built a wall between her and the man she once loved. It wasn't about wild fights or big arguments. It was about the slow erosion of trust, the way affection dried up over time, leaving only a fragile shell. She remembered moments when she had reached out, only to be met with indifference or distraction. She remembered nights when she cried silently, hoping someone would notice, hoping someone would care. Now, here in the woods, Clara wanted to reclaim her own story. She wanted to find a way back to herself, to the woman who loved hiking and laughing and dreaming. But the presence of those men, whether real or imagined, reminded her that the past wasn't so easy to leave behind. As the trail dipped down near a small stream, Clara stopped to drink and rest. The water was cold and clear, refreshing her more than she expected. She closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the moment, the peace, the solitude. She told herself she could do this, that she was stronger than the silence she had lived in. But as she opened her eyes and looked back up the path, she caught a movement just beyond the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. The men were there, not hidden, but watching. Clara's escape had been found. She didn't know why they were there, whether it was coincidence, concern, or something else entirely. But the feeling of being watched made her heart ache in a new way, mixing fear with a strange sense of connection. They were part of her story now, whether she liked it or not. Clara took a deep breath and kept walking. The hike was no longer just a way to escape. It was a journey toward understanding, toward facing the complicated truths she had been avoiding. The forest held no easy answers, but it held space for her pain and hope, her heartbreak and strength. And as the sun climbed higher, Clara felt for the first time in a long time that maybe she could find her way again, not by running away, but by confronting what had followed her into the woods and what might follow her beyond them. Clara kept moving along the narrow trail, her breath steady but her mind racing. The forest around her seemed to close in tighter, the trees standing tall and silent as if they were witnesses to something she hadn't yet understood. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that she wasn't as alone as she had hoped. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing but the thick underbrush and dappled sunlight. Still, her heart raced with a mixture of emotions, confusion, sadness, and something sharper, like the sting of betrayal. The men she had hoped to escape, her husband's friends, were somehow here, in this place she thought would be hers alone. Clara's mind spun with questions. Why were they here? Had they followed her? Or was this some strange coincidence? Her footsteps quickened. The trail twisted and rose, leading her toward a rocky overlook where the forest stretched endlessly in every direction. She wanted to put distance between herself and the feeling of being watched. Yet, no matter how fast she moved, the shadow lingered. Suddenly, she heard voices not loud, but close enough to catch her attention. She froze. Two men appeared at the edge of the path ahead, their figures framed by the golden light filtering through the trees. Clara recognized them instantly, Mark and Ryan, two of her husband's closest friends. She felt a wave of mixed emotions. Relief, because they weren't strangers. Fear, because their presence here was unexpected. And anger, because it felt like an invasion of the space she had sought for herself. Mark stepped forward, his expression open but uncertain. "Clara," he said softly, as if testing the sound of her name. Ryan stood quietly beside him, eyes steady but kind. Neither made a move to block her path. Clara's heart pounded fiercely. She wanted to turn and run, but her feet stayed rooted. "I didn't expect to see you here," Clara said, voice trembling slightly. "Why are you here?" Mark looked down at the ground for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "We wanted to make sure you were okay," he said, honestly. "When we heard you were planning this hike alone, we worried." Clara's mind raced. She had imagined many things about how this trip would go, but concern from these men wasn't one of them. "I needed to get away," she said quietly, "from everything." Ryan nodded slowly. "We understand that. Maybe better than you think." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the forest wrapping around them like a shield. Clara felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, despite the tension in the air. These men, who had always been part of the life she wanted to escape, were now sharing this space with her in a way that felt different, more honest, more vulnerable. Mark broke the silence. "Clara, we know things haven't been easy for you, and maybe we haven't always seen what you were going through. But we're here now. If you want to talk, we're willing to listen." Clara's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. It was painful to hear the truth in his words, to realize how isolated she had felt even when surrounded by people who cared in their own way. She had built walls to protect herself, walls that had only grown higher with time. "I don't know if talking will fix anything," she whispered, "but I can't keep pretending everything is okay." Ryan took a step closer, his voice gentle. You don't have to pretend here. For the first time in months, Clara let herself breathe fully. The forest around them held no judgments, only quiet understanding. She thought about her marriage, about the silence that had grown between her and her husband, about the lonely nights filled with unanswered questions. The presence of Mark and Ryan, once a source of discomfort, now felt like a fragile thread connecting her back to a world she had almost given up on. Maybe this hike wasn't just an escape, it was a chance to face the pain, to begin healing. Clara wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. I don't want to run anymore, she said, voice stronger now. I want to find a way to move forward, even if it's hard. Mark smiled gently. That's brave, Clara. We're here to help if you'll let us. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows through the trees, the three of them continued along the trail together. The forest no longer felt like a place to hide from the world, but a space where truths could be spoken softly, and wounds could begin to heal. Clara's heart was still heavy, but it carried a spark of hope. The men who had once been part of the pain were now part of the path towards something new, a chance at understanding, forgiveness, and maybe even love that could be rebuilt on stronger ground. And as the evening settled over the woods, Clara felt for the first time in a long while that she was not alone. Clara walked slowly, the quiet forest around her feeling different now, less like a refuge and more like a place of reckoning. Mark and Ryan followed close behind, their presence a strange comfort and an unexpected challenge. The sun was lower in the sky and the air was cooler. The path wound between tall trees, the shadows stretching long across the ground. Clara's mind was heavy with thoughts she hadn't dared face before. What had brought her to this moment? What could come next? Mark broke the silence first, his voice calm but steady. Clara, we've all made mistakes. Sometimes we don't see what's happening until it's almost too late. His words hung in the air, gentle but powerful. Clara looked at him, surprised at how honest he seemed. It was true. She had lived with the silence in her marriage for so long, pretending everything was fine because it was easier than facing the truth. Ryan nodded quietly. We never wanted to hurt you, but maybe we didn't notice the distance growing between you and James. James, her husband's name, felt like a weight on her chest. She had loved him once, believed in their future together. Now, the space between them was filled with cold looks and half-hearted conversations. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust anymore. It feels like everything I believed in has fallen apart. Her hands clenched the straps of her backpack. She had hoped this hike would clear her mind, but instead, it was opening old wounds she wasn't sure she could heal. Mark stopped and looked at her with steady eyes. Trust is hard to rebuild, but it's not impossible. It starts with being honest about what hurts. He paused, then added softly, and sometimes forgiveness begins with understanding, even when it's painful. Clara looked away, her throat tight. She thought about the nights spent crying silently, the times she had felt invisible, the growing suspicion that James had drifted away from her heart long before she noticed. The men beside her, once shadows in her life, now seemed like unexpected allies in her pain. Ryan took a step forward. Clara, sometimes people hurt the ones they love because they don't know how else to deal with their own struggles. It doesn't excuse the pain, but it helps to see it. His voice was kind, without judgment. Clara wanted to believe him, but found it hard to let go of the bitterness. The three of them continued walking, the path narrowing as they moved deeper into the woods. Clara's thoughts tumbled like the leaves beneath her feet. She had wanted to run away, to leave the men and the memories behind. But here they were, standing with her in the quiet, sharing a fragile honesty. Mark stopped by a small clearing where wildflowers bloomed in soft colors. He looked at Clara and said, "This isn't just about you or James. It's about all of us. We've been part of your life, and maybe we didn't always do right by you." His voice carried a sincere regret that surprised Clara. She felt a lump rise in her throat. "I never wanted to blame you, but sometimes I felt like I was fighting alone." Tears welled in her eyes, not from anger, but from the release of so much pain held inside. The forest around them felt like a witness to her truth. Ryan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore." His words were quiet but filled with meaning. Clara looked at the two men, seeing in their faces a shared weariness, a hope for something better. The sun dipped lower, casting warm orange light through the trees. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body ease just a little. This moment, difficult and raw, was also a beginning. She realized she didn't have to carry the pain silently anymore. There was space here for tears, for questions, for healing. Mark smiled softly. "You're stronger than you know, Clara. And this journey, this path you're on, it's about finding your own strength again." His words gave her a flicker of hope. A reason to believe that, maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Clara nodded slowly. "I want to try. To understand, to heal." Her voice was firmer now, carrying a quiet determination she hadn't felt in a long time. The men beside her seemed to understand that this was just the first step, not the end. As twilight settled in, the three of them began walking back toward the main trailhead. The woods, once a place of escape, had become a place of truth. Clara felt the weight of her past, but also the possibility of a future where she could reclaim her life one. On a step at a time, the silence between them was peaceful now, filled not with fear or suspicion, but with a shared hope. Clara knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be hard conversations, painful memories, and uncertain days. But for the first time, she wasn't walking it alone. The forest whispered around them as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Clara looked up, feeling a quiet promise in the night air. She was ready to face what had been broken, to find the pieces that could be mended, and to open her heart to the possibility of love and trust again. And in that moment, beneath the vast sky and ancient trees, Clara took her first real breath of freedom. The forest darkened as night fell, but Clara's heart felt lighter than it had in months. The quiet woods around her seemed to hold a kind of magic, a soft promise that things could change. She walked slowly now, with Mark and Ryan beside her, their presence no longer strange or unwelcome, but steady and real. The sun had set, leaving behind a sky sprinkled with stars, and the cool air wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. Clara's mind was full of thoughts, hope, fear, and a strange mix of pain and possibility. She had come here to escape, to run from the men in her life who made her feel unseen and unheard. Instead, she found herself facing them, not as enemies, but as part of a difficult truth she had been avoiding for too long. Mark and Ryan weren't just shadows from her past. They were people who cared in their own way. Imperfect but sincere, as they followed the fading trail toward the trailhead. Clara felt a quiet strength growing inside her. This wasn't the end of her story, it was a new beginning. She had carried so much silence and loneliness. But now she was beginning to speak, to open herself to understanding and forgiveness. The pain was still there, but it no longer held her hostage. Mark glanced at her, a soft smile on his lips. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes," he said, "but you're finding your way back." His words felt like a balm, gentle and true. Clara nodded, grateful for his kindness. Ryan added quietly, "We're all learning. Maybe the hardest part is admitting that we need each other, even when it's complicated." Clara looked at him and saw the honesty in his eyes. She realized that healing wasn't a straight path. It was messy, uncertain, and often slow. The three of them reached a small clearing where the trail ended. Clara paused and looked up at the stars shining brightly above. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of peace. The forest had been her refuge, her place to run. But now, it was a place to stand still and face what came next. She turned to Mark and Ryan. "Thank you for being here, for listening." Her voice was soft but steady. They smiled, understanding the weight of her words. "I hope this is just the start," Mark said. "There's a long road ahead, but you don't have to walk it alone." Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to leave the woods behind. The path back to her life was uncertain, filled with questions she didn't have answers to yet, but she felt ready to face them one step at a time as they walked together toward the parking lot. Clara thought about her marriage, about the love she once believed in and the distance that had grown. She didn't know what the future held, whether she and James could find their way back to each other, or if her journey would lead somewhere new. But for the first time, she felt she had a choice. The night was quiet except for the soft sounds of their footsteps. The stars seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if encouraging her to believe in new beginnings. Clara smiled faintly, feeling a spark of hope in her chest. This hike, meant to be an escape, had become a turning point. She had faced her fears, her heartbreak, and the complicated truth of the people around her. And in doing so, she found a strength she hadn't known she had. The future was still unknown. But Clara knew she would meet it with courage and an open heart. No longer running away, but moving forward, ready to heal, to forgive, and maybe, one day, to love again under the vast, starry sky. Clara took her first step toward a new life, knowing that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the brightest beginnings. Emma had no idea what to expect when she came home that Friday evening. The week had been long and tiring, filled with the usual routine of work, errands, and quiet dinners. Jake, her husband, had seemed distant lately, more distracted, less himself. They barely talked during the week, and when they did, it felt like they were skimming the surface of something deeper that neither wanted to dive into. Emma hoped that tonight would be different, that maybe Jake would finally open up as she stepped through the front door. She noticed the soft glow of the living room lights and the faint sound of laughter. Curiosity pulled her forward. When she walked into the room, Jake was there, but he wasn't alone. His 3 closest friends stood around, smiling, holding drinks, and chatting as if this was some long-planned gathering. Emma was surprised. She hadn't expected anyone tonight, especially not a surprise party or get-together. Jake caught her eye and smiled, though something in his expression was unreadable. "Hey, Em," he said softly. "We wanted to surprise you." His friends nodded, offering warm greetings. Emma forced a smile, but felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't the kind of surprise she was ready for, not yet. The friends tried to make conversation, telling stories and jokes that made Jake laugh more openly than Emma had heard in weeks. The room felt warm and alive, but Emma's heart beat faster. Why now? Why with his friends? She couldn't shake the feeling that this night was the start of something she didn't understand yet. As the evening went on, Jake pulled Emma aside. "I know I've been distant," he admitted quietly. "There's been stuff I haven't said. Things I thought I could handle alone." His eyes searched hers for a reaction, but Emma was still trying to process everything. "Tonight is about being honest," he said. "With you, with them, with myself." Emma nodded, the tension easing slightly, but still thick in the air. She wanted to believe him, to believe this surprise was a step toward something real. But a quiet voice in her mind whispered doubts, memories of late nights when Jake came home late without explanation. The feeling of being alone even when he was in the same room. One of Jake's friends, Tom, pulled Emma into a side conversation, sharing a story about Jake's struggles at work and how his friends had been there to support him. Their loyalty surprised Emma. She hadn't realized how much Jake had been leaning on them. It was clear this group had been through a lot together, but Emma felt like she had been left on the outside as the night grew deeper. The friends began to share more personal stories. Jake's friend Mike hesitated, then spoke about trust and mistakes, about moments when choices hurt those closest to them. Emma felt her stomach tighten. Was this just small talk, or was there something more beneath the surface? Jake looked at her again, his expression open but serious. "I needed them tonight, and I need you too." His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability Emma hadn't seen before. The laughter in the room softened, replaced by a quiet that made every word hang in the air. Emma realized this surprise wasn't just a party. It was a moment Jake had crafted to bring everything out into the open, to face whatever was hidden between them. But the truth felt heavy, like a secret waiting to break free. The evening ended with promises to talk more, to be honest even when it hurt. Jake's friends left slowly, giving Emma and Jake a moment alone. The silence between them was different, now charged with possibility but shadowed by uncertainty. Emma stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker outside. She wondered how much she really knew about the man she married and how much she was willing to fight to keep what they had. The surprise had changed everything, but she didn't yet know how. That night, Emma lay awake, thoughts swirling. The surprise wasn't just about friends and laughter. It was about unspoken truths finally coming to light. Tomorrow would bring new questions and maybe answers too. But for now, all she could do was wait. The next morning, Emma woke with a heavy feeling in her chest. Last night's surprise still lingered in her mind, not just the unexpected gathering, but the quiet moments between Jake and his friends and the weight behind their words. She knew there was more to the story, something Jake wasn't ready to say out loud yet. She hoped today would bring clarity. Jake was already awake when she came downstairs. He looked tired but determined, like he had made a decision. The usual warmth between them felt fragile, stretched thin by the secrets hanging in the air. Emma sat down at the kitchen table and Jake joined her, his eyes searching hers. "I want to tell you everything," Jake said quietly. "I owe you that." Emma nodded, ready to listen. Jake took a deep breath and began. He told her about the struggles he'd been hiding, the pressure at work, the fear of failing as a husband and a provider. He confessed that some of the distance she felt wasn't just stress, but his way of protecting her from his own mistakes. He hesitated, then revealed that he had made a terrible choice. During a particularly hard week when everything felt like it was falling apart, he had turned to someone else for comfort. It was a moment of weakness, a brief connection with someone who didn't know the real him. The guilt had eaten at him every day since. Emma felt a sharp pain but forced herself to stay calm. Jake's honesty was painful, but it was the first step she needed. She wanted to understand, to see if there was a way forward. Jake explained that the surprise last night was part of his way to be accountable. He invited his friends because they had been witnesses to his mistakes and his efforts to change. They had stood by him, encouraging him to face the truth and rebuild trust. He hoped Emma would see that he wasn't running away from what he had done. The room felt heavy with emotion as Jake spoke. Emma struggled with conflicting feelings, hurt, anger, but also a flicker of hope. She loved Jake deeply, and she knew forgiveness wasn't easy. But maybe it was possible. Later that day, Emma met with one of Jake's friends, Mark, who had been part of the surprise gathering. Mark shared how Jake had opened up to them, how much he regretted hurting Emma, and how committed he was to making things right. Hearing it from someone else made Emma feel less alone in this painful moment. As the day went on, Emma and Jake began to talk more openly. They revisited old memories, both good and bad, trying to find the cracks that had allowed distance to grow between them. There were tears, apologies, and moments of silence where nothing needed to be said. Emma realized that infidelity wasn't just about a single act. It was about the loneliness and misunderstandings that had built up over time. Both of them had contributed to the walls between them, and breaking those down would take time and patience. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She thought about the surprise, the confession, and the fragile hope that maybe their marriage could survive this. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew the truth had finally come to light. And sometimes, the hardest truths were the ones that could save a relationship. Emma decided she was willing to try for herself, for Jake, and for the love they once shared. But she also knew that forgiveness wasn't a promise. It was a journey they had to walk together, step by step. The days that followed were some of the hardest Emma had ever faced. The shock of Jake's confession still weighed heavily on her heart. But beneath that weight was a growing desire to understand not just his actions, but what had been missing between them. The silence that once filled their home now gave way to long, honest conversations. Neither of them shied away from the difficult questions. Though the answers weren't always easy to hear, Jake was open about his regrets. He spoke about how loneliness and pressure had clouded his judgment, how he'd felt trapped in a version of himself he didn't recognize. Emma listened, her own feelings shifting between anger, sadness, and a fragile hope. She wasn't sure if she could fully trust him yet, but his honesty sparked something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of connection. One afternoon, Emma found herself sitting on the porch, the warm sun casting soft light on her face. Jake joined her quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. They sat side by side, shoulders almost touching, but not quite. For a while, neither spoke. The comfort of simply being together was new, yet strangely familiar. "I'm scared," Emma finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that things will never be the same. That I'll always carry this hurt." Jake reached out, gently taking her hand. "I'm scared too," he said. "But I want to try, to be better. For you." For us, the vulnerability between them was raw and real. It wasn't the grand gestures or dramatic moments that would heal their wounds, but these quiet, honest exchanges. They began to rebuild piece by piece, learning how to trust again. Yet the road wasn't without its challenges. Old fears surfaced unexpectedly. Emma would catch herself doubting, wondering if Jake's promises were enough. Jake struggled with guilt, sometimes retreating into silence when he felt overwhelmed. But through it all, they kept returning to each other, refusing to give up. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake surprised Emma with a simple dinner at their favorite local spot. The cozy restaurant was filled with soft music and the smell of fresh bread. They talked about dreams they'd once shared and new hopes they could create together. Emma realized that while their marriage had been shaken, it wasn't broken. There was still love beneath the pain of foundation, waiting to be rebuilt stronger than before. She saw in Jake's eyes a determination that matched her own, a promise to fight for what they had. In the quiet moments after dinner, they walked hand in hand through the streets of their small town, the cool night air wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The surprise that had started it all now seemed like a turning point, a painful but necessary moment. That forced them to face their truth. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where honesty and patience would guide them forward. Though the scars remained, Emma and Jake were learning to carry them together, not as burdens, but as reminders of how far they'd come. Their story was no longer just about infidelity or mistakes. It was about healing, forgiveness, and the quiet strength found in love's second chance. As they walked back home, the stars twinkling overhead, Emma squeezed Jake's hand gently. "We're not perfect," she said softly, "but maybe that's okay." Jake smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Maybe it is. Weeks passed since Jake's confession, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for Emma and him. The air between them was lighter, though the journey was far from over. Both understood that healing was a process, a series of small steps rather than giant leaps. Emma had accepted that forgiveness wasn't immediate, it was something she needed time to give. And Jake knew patience was his greatest task. They spent many evenings talking, sometimes late into the night, sharing feelings they had kept buried for years. Jake opened up about his fears, not just of losing Emma, but of being vulnerable in ways he never had before. Emma shared her own pain and confusion, admitting that trust was fragile and had to be earned day by day. These conversations weren't easy, but they built a bridge between them that hadn't existed before. One afternoon, Emma suggested they attend couples counseling. Jake agreed without hesitation. The sessions were tough, sometimes bringing tears, sometimes frustration, but they became a safe place to face the wounds, honestly. The counselor helped them see patterns they hadn't noticed and encouraged them to find new ways to support each other. Outside the sessions, Jake made a real effort to show Emma how committed he was to their marriage. He started small, bringing her coffee in the morning, leaving notes with kind words, taking time off work to be present. Emma noticed these gestures and felt warmth growing in her heart. It wasn't about grand declarations, but steady, genuine actions. One weekend, they decided to take a short trip to the countryside, away from the distractions of daily life. The quiet days among nature gave them space to reconnect. They walked through forests, shared meals by the fireplace, and laughed in ways that felt like old times. The distance from their usual surroundings helped both see their relationship from a fresh perspective. Emma found herself thinking about this surprise night again the moment Jake had invited his friends over. At the time, it had felt overwhelming, confusing. But now she understood it differently. That night wasn't just about a surprise party. It was Jake's way of showing her that he wasn't alone and that he wanted her to be part of his world again. It was an invitation to rebuild not just their marriage, but the trust and friendship beneath it. Even with progress, challenges remained. Some days, old fears crept back. Emma sometimes questioned if she could fully move past the betrayal, and Jake sometimes doubted if he could truly make up for what had happened. But instead of shutting down, they chose to talk openly, reminding each other of their commitment. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from their porch, Jake took Emma's hand. "Thank you for staying," he said softly, "for believing in us even when it was hard." Emma smiled, feeling a mix of relief and hope. "I'm still scared," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try, to trust again." That night, as they went to bed, Emma felt a quiet peace she hadn't known in months. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time it felt possible to walk it together. Their story was no longer defined by mistakes or pain, but by the courage it took to face those mistakes and the love that held them through. They were building something new, fragile but real, imperfect but theirs. Emma and Jake knew there would be more ups and downs, but they had learned that honesty, patience, and forgiveness were the strongest foundations. And with that, they were ready to face whatever came next together.